episode 1, version 2. This is hey, that's why we said 7 p.m. ish.
7-ish.
Because the first episode is always interesting. Wait, Sean Belcher, hold on. Let me respond back to you. Okay, there we go. It seems like people are hearing me.
Sean, yes. Franco Hernandez, Carl Belcher.
So if you can hear my golden, beautiful voice.
Oh, Lord. Here we go.
All right. So let me try. I'm going to be talking and sharing stuff out at the same time. But yes. All right. Good. This is episode 1, version 2, though, of the ReMARKable Wrestling Podcast, a.k.a. the Anybody Can Have a Wrestling Podcast. And I'm, of course, Boom Boom Brandon Oliver. I mean, you check, we're doing ReMARKable, wrestling podcasts. And so the emphasis is on Mark, right? Yeah. I'm looking for confirmation. All right.
Okay, so yes, no, definitely.
The emphasis on, so check out, look at this shirt right here. Macho Man Randy Savage all over this nice shirt. Oh, man, look at that. Handsome.
I should have worn my wanted Mick Foley shirt that he gave me himself when I was his gopher. Yeah,
oh yeah?
Many years ago, back in the airport. You remember that?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, when we were at the. Anyways, it's a long story. The airport convention center thing.
Oh, okay, that's right. All right, so. It is the ReMARKable Wrestling Podcast. And the reason why we're doing it is because, number one, we're bored. I mean, hell, 6 months ago, I did not want to do a podcast. Josh can verify this because he would always to me that I got to do a podcast. And, that all these other people do podcasts. And that hence the name. Anyone can have a wrestling podcast. And then, I mean, hell, even 3 or 4 weeks ago, I didn't want to do a podcast. But we're all quarantined thanks to the coronavirus.
Don't say the name.
I'm so glad you said that. Have you noticed that like in WWE, you cannot say COVID-19, coronavirus, anything like that. It was always alluded to as like some sort of crisis or during this unprecedented time or something like that. You never actually hear them say coronavirus. At least I didn't during WrestleMania.
I didn't hear it once. Did not hear it on Raw, and it's something that popped into my mind. I was thinking for once.
Uh-huh.
Maybe when you watch wrestling, you have to leave reality behind. It's an escape, maybe something like that. I don't know.
Right. I mean, and I'm going to be sharing this out real quick on my social media just to make sure people are watching, because that's the whole goal. We want people to watch. So, but anyway, yeah, I mean, it was interesting that they didn't mention the coronavirus at all, COVID-19, and I don't know if it's just because maybe historically they don't, want people to remember this time or anything like that. But, it was pretty interesting that they just refused to even acknowledge it. But yeah, I mean, so anyway, that's how the this wrestling broadcast came to be. And of course, like I said, the emphasis is on Mark for ReMARKable. So even though I am the promoter of RCW River City Wrestling, this podcast is not about RCW. Now, here's the thing. There's always a but, right? There's always a but. There's a big but. So let's talk about your big but. All right?
Yeah, what?
So the but is I may occasionally slip in an RCW here or there, or show my content a little bit, but this is about WWE, AEW, Impact, Ring of Honor, all the other independent things that Brandon Oliver shouldn't mention or shouldn't talk about. But this is supposed to be just kind of like a free-for-all wrestling podcast, and it's just another wrestling podcast in the sea of wrestling podcasts.
So I should not be showing the prowrestlingtees.com/RCW forever slide right now?
Oh, no, you should.
Oh, okay.
But, that's why we're another, anyone can have a podcast, wrestling podcast. And just like how I like to say, anyone can run a wrestling promotion, and and so I told you a little bit would be a little bit raw, a little bit, uncensored and things like that. But just like how I say anyone can run a wrestling promotion, and these days it really does seem like it. Um, anyone can run. It seems like a wrestling podcast, and so I figure I would join in on that as well and have a little bit of fun with that. So with that in mind, Josh, let's start talking about the main topic for this week, which is, of course, WrestleMania occurred. That's the show of shows, right? The biggest stage of them all took place this past weekend. And so I think you're the producer. Can you put up that WrestleMania graphic?
Yes, sir.
So this is the cool thing. It's not just going to be us talking the whole time. We have some graphics and some cool stuff. Is it up there? I can't tell from mine. Okay,
well,
so
you've got a delay. We've got the banner up there.
So,
it looks like a roll of toilet, 2 rolls of toilet paper.
I don't know who made that. I found it somewhere, and I thought, WWE probably should. I mean, obviously, if they're not going to mention the coronavirus at all, then obviously, they're not going to show that graphic. But I thought it was pretty funny, with the WrestleMania, the toilet paper, and moving into Performance Center, and for as much flack as WWE has gotten, you have to understand. Now, I'm not going to talk like I'm an expert, but this is our podcast, right? Um, WWE is a giant machine that is integrated into pop culture. So kind of like how you say, I want a Coke, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you want Coca-Cola. That may mean you want Sprite, you want something, Dr. Pepper or whatever. That's how WWE is. When people say wrestling, I could tell you this as a wrestling promoter and going around trying to get sponsors and trying to get venues and things like that. And I'll tell them, well, what it is, it's a wrestling show. And they're like, huh? I'm like, oh, like WWE, but local. So, and as soon as they say that, they're like, oh, okay. Now they start to get a picture of it. WWE is that. So, they got a lot of criticism, a lot of people saying that they should have postponed WrestleMania, that they should have, held off for it until after this is all over. But, they did something that, they get a lot of flack, sometimes deserved, some not. But I think in this instance, they were pushing for it because they wanted people to talk about something else besides coronavirus and something else get our minds off of it. So it was 2 nights, as everybody knows. They broke it down to 2 nights. Everything was pre-recorded from the Performance Center, and right off the top, Josh, I want to talk about what was probably two of the most talked about things. First of all, the Boneyard match between The Undertaker and AJ Styles.
Yes.
So breaking this down, obviously it's different from the norm. We're used to decades and decades of 2 guys settling their issues inside of a wrestling ring with a crowd. But what happens when there is no crowd available? You could take some creative liberties, and for a production like WWE, which is incredible, and you have the right players in the right places, why not run a Boneyard match? So, you have The Undertaker, you have AJ Styles, you have Undertaker coming in on the motorcycle like he's, the American badass again, coming to the Boneyard, to Metallica. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that, right? I mean, and then of course you have AJ Styles, who was perfect in that role. And they had Undertaker beating AJ's ass for the first few minutes. Then you had the OC come out, and they had like some evil druids, I guess, some druids that turned against the Undertaker or something. I don't know if the OC, paid them off, or I don't know why druids turned against the Undertaker. Because he was the American badass. He wasn't the dead guy.
That's honestly the one thing I personally did not like about it. I'm like, they're druids.
Yeah, like why didn't the Druids sign with the Undertaker? But maybe because he's the American badass here and not the dead guy. I don't know, but regardless, that enabled AJ to kind of get ahead, and then AJ throws him into the wall of the of that structure, that building, and then of course he was getting ready to bury the Undertaker alive, and then Undertaker teleports right behind AJ Styles. There's the big comeback. They go up on top of the roof of the I guess it was like a barn or some sort of
The
building,
shed, yeah.
shed. Uh, Undertaker's destroying the OC. They're doing pyro up there. He throws AJ Styles off the roof, and then to me, the best parts of this, whether you want to call it a match or a cinematic match or what have you, was actually after he chokeslammed AJ Styles off of there, and I think that was really the best work between Styles and Undertaker. I really enjoyed um, I'm gonna go into this in a little bit about why they were the right guys, but I really enjoyed the things Undertaker was saying, the way he was like, "Hey, go out like a man," and AJ Styles was, saying to not bury him, um, and then the Undertaker being like, "Hey, man, you fought your ass off. I'm not gonna bury you. I'm not gonna," he hugs him, just for that little second, right? And he turns back around, kicks him into the into the open grave, and then buries AJ Styles alive, and then rides off into the night with Metallica playing. And so, Josh, I mean, I've been talking a lot here, but what did you think about the Boneyard match?
You and I, a lot of people might not know this, but you and I have two completely different versions of what we see as wrestling, and we enjoy it in different ways. And I mean, I completely enjoyed it. One of the things that I liked about it, and one of the things that also upset me about it, is I've talked to coworkers and I've talked to some family members and some friends that aren't wrestling fans. The,
Right,
the, the ones that every time that I bring up wrestling, they're like, wrestling's fake, right? Those type of people. And the
right,
majority of them saw the match. They saw. I mean, they didn't have anything else to do, and the app was free for new people to sign up, and a lot of people signed up for it, and they loved it.
right,
And the
right.
only people I'm hearing saying, "Oh, that was horrible, that was bad," are wrestling fans, and it's like, what the hell, man?
Well, so I'll get down and to what I was talking about earlier and having the right players. So, a lot of people obviously, and I think you have some pictures of Matt Hardy. A lot of people say, oh, this is coming from Matt Hardy and the broken Matt Hardy character. And, a lot of the work that he was doing in Impact and, things like that. The thing about it is that, vignettes and cinematic wrestling has been around for a while. I mean, it's been in Lucha Libre lore. I remember being at WrestleMania 12 and seeing Goldust and Roddy Piper like a street alley fight.
Yes,
They've done some stuff. You know, Now what makes it work more than anything is the fact that you have the right people in the right positions. You have the Undertaker coming in on a motorcycle. He's got the swagger. He's a big biker dude, tattooed up, badass. He's got the Texas, accent, and AJ's kind of like a little punk, right? And they were just the right guys. So it's just like Broken Matt Hardy. It is a brilliance of his character to expand on that and to do all those vignettes and do the final deletion matches and things like that because Matt Hardy is so good at it. And I
yes,
think I think it's not something that you can do all the time. It's not something that every single match on the card will be able to do during this crisis or maybe longer. Uh, but you have to have the right players. And I really think for me, that was to be honest with you, there's only two matches I've watched more than once since WrestleMania. That was one of them. I've watched the Boneyard match probably about a good 3 or 4 times already. Um, just because I love the theatrics of it. And for me, as a person that grew up around wrestling, loving wrestling, obsessed with it since I could form memories. The thing about wrestling is that um, it's a show, it's entertainment, and that goes whether it's WWE, I mean, I hate to say it, AEW fans, same thing. It's a show. Impact, Ring of Honor, so on and so forth. It's all a show. The principles of it are still the same, which is it's a work, right? You have two people, two characters usually, sometimes more of it's tag, whatever, blah blah blah, that are working together in a simulated fight with a predetermined winner. So whether that's WWE, AEW, RCW, whatever the case may be, um, that's the principle. That's the meat of what professional wrestling is. And so, the thing about wrestling is that it's able to do things that, since you're already suspending your disbelief over what's real and fake, um, it's able to go an extra step. I remember seeing, I believe it was the Big Show as the Giant being thrown off the roof of where they were at in Detroit. I believe it was WCW. They had a monster truck match between
Yes.
the Giant and Hulk Hogan. And I think it was the Giant that fell off the roof. So there's always that sort of element of theatrics. And when you're talking about WrestleMania, this is the show of shows. And so, a lot of eyes were on it. And I think people were like, hey, it's a little bit different. The non-fans, the non-hardcores, I guess you can call them, were like, hey, it's a little bit different. I remember growing up in the 90s and, WWF was all cowboys and race car drivers and clowns. WCW was offering RoboCop and things like that. And then ECW came along. And I remember growing up as a fan, not everybody loved ECW. There were a lot of people that thought it was garbage wrestling, that thought it was trash, that thought it was, wrestlers, cussing, having blood, blah, blah. I remember that. I remember people being against ECW, but that, because of ECW, ushered in NWO, it ushered in Attitude Era. It takes some sort of evolving. And I think, Broken Matt Hardy was onto something. I think WWE took it to another level. And I think during this crisis, you're going to see a lot more of it. And, I would expect to see even more awesome productions. The only other thing, the only negative, honestly, that I could say about it is that I'm afraid on the independent level that promoters are going to say, I want to do a cinematic match. And they're going to get their 250-pound guys with terrible lighting and horrible backgrounds and all this other stuff to have a cinematic match. And I think it's going to lose its effect. Right now, you keep it to the Boneyard match, the Firefly Funhouse match, a couple of other ones, and you just, really run with those well-produced segments. The other thing about The Undertaker, Josh, is I think I sent you this picture of him as Texas Red in World Class Championship Wrestling.
Yes.
His debut match against Bruiser Brody. Now, The Undertaker, I talked about this, and I'm a huge, since this is a remarkable wrestling podcast, I'm a huge Undertaker mark. I love The Undertaker since, basically, actually, when he was a part of the Skyscrapers, I remember that was a really badass tag team, two big old dudes, and he came over. I was like, okay, he's The Undertaker now. And I just think, I'm not upset at all that he wrestles one time a year. The one time a year is memorable. And but anyway, so that picture of Texas Red and Bruiser Brody at World Class Championship Wrestling, I mean, that is an era of when men were men. And I mean, I'm sure Undertaker got an education that night. I mean, being in World Class Championship Wrestling, and the way that locker room probably was, I can only imagine. And then, of course, your first match, it's like, hey, kid, I'm gonna throw you in there with Bruiser Brody.
Great.
It's just unbelievable. But I think Taker, obviously everybody talks about him being the locker room leader and being, this, loyal veteran to WWE and being kind of the enforcer of the locker room. He was kind of like the judge of the wrestler's court. And you always hear all these like other things like that. And, well, when your education was World Class Championship Wrestling, your first match is Bruiser Brody. I mean, you either have one of two options, probably, and that's probably why they did it. Was your first option is to quit, the business and leave completely, and the second option is to be a man about it. And I love that picture. I think it's really awesome, and I think it has made Undertaker to the American badass that he is today. I think it's awesome.
For those of y'all that can't see our video, let me go back to that real quick. Brandon was doing the quotation fingers when he says, being a man about it.
Yes, be a man about it. Yeah. So, so that's the first segment. And check this out, Josh. You see this right here? So I'm drinking my tea. I drink tea. I am a fancy lad. And so I got my Boom Boom Brandon Oliver mug. I got to keep the pipes, in good condition. I have to drink, it's honey hibiscus.
Warm tea, honey, and yeah.
Yeah, it's got honey in it. It's got sugar. I mean, when you got a voice like Boom Boom Brandon Oliver, you have to.
Wait a minute. Was that the cue for me to bring out the merchandise?
No, not yet.
So, okay, no. Let me take the belts back. Okay, I'm sorry.
All right, so Josh, let me ask you this: what was your other favorite match at WrestleMania besides? I'm assuming a Boneyard match was out there.
Yeah.
What was the other favorite?
The other cinematic match, the Firefly.
And see, that's we were talking
real quick, and it's not because there was nobody in the crowd and there wasn't the energy because the crowd wasn't there. I never paid to see the people in the crowd. Back when I was paying $70 to see a pay-per-view, every time they'd cut to the crowd, I was like, I don't want to see them. But yes, I understand. Go ahead.
I'm choosing my words carefully on that because I know there's some fans watching RCW.
No. The live experience of any wrestling show is awesome. And for the people that are there right then and there, that's awesome. That's great. They're great people. I'm just talking about me personally, myself, when I was watching WrestleMania. I wasn't going to lose out on the matches just because there wasn't anybody in the background.
Right.
Now, we did miss one guy that had that look of shock on his face when Taker lost.
Sure. Sure. And I think, crowds can certainly, help a match. And, there's been times where a crowd has definitely made the absolute difference. I mean, you've seen some boring episodes of Raw where the crowds are sitting on their hands, or you've seen some ones where Stone Cold comes walking out and everybody's on their feet. Obviously, the crowd is a huge, humongous part of wrestling, and for the performers as well.
Yes.
It's hard for me to be Boom Boom Brandon Oliver and talk trash if there's nobody there. If the people are giving and taking, like for example, the last RCW event, I said I wasn't going to talk about RCW, but
I opened the door. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But last show, this is a little inside thing, but hopefully Tommy is watching, or at least Tommy is going to watch at some point.
Replay.
Yeah. But during the show, I leaned to Tommy. I was like, hey, I need your help with something. When you see it, you'll know it, right? Because Tommy has been going to RCW shows since we've started, and we've, been around for 18 years, basically. And so, I was like, hey, just pay attention. When you see it, you'll know it. And so I had noticed throughout the show at the last RCW event that there was a little girl in the front row that was so into everything that was occurring at the show. I mean, she was cheering, she was clapping, she was booing, she was, saying things to the wrestlers and stuff like that. And it was just so good. It was so, to me, what wrestling is all about.
Yes.
And so, so I already had it in mind when I do my thing as Boom Boom Brandon Oliver, I'm gonna make sure that I'm gonna point this little girl out in the crowd because I'm hoping that there'll be a give and take, right? So, I went around, I insulted Carl Belcher and I insulted a couple of other fans, and I finally made my way to the girl, and I insulted her once, I insulted her twice, I was like, come on, right? And that's when I was leaning on Tommy. I know Tommy was yelling things for her to yell out and stuff like that. And I believe it was like a third or fourth try. She, told me off. She told off Boom Boom Brandon Oliver and said, hey, you need to go back to kindergarten or something like that,
To
right?
learn some
And
manners.
Tommy, was loud, and of course the very loud section right there, was going crazy. And I was able to give and take on that. I was able to, as a performer, relate to that. And I was like, okay, I mean, she fired back. That's when a crowd, I think, really just makes wrestling. Now, having said that, for some reason, the two most talked about matches from WrestleMania were not inside of a wrestling ring, or hardly at all, and not considered a typical wrestling match. But everybody's talking about the Boneyard match, and then this next match I'm talking about, which is the Firefly Funhouse match.
Yes.
And everybody's like, oh, well, it's not a match, it's a promo. The thing about it is that WWE obviously had to, probably adjust, and who knows, maybe they had an awesome 25-minute match worked out, in front of 80,000 people. That would have been awesome. They have to do an audible. And so my cats are fighting. So, yes, I have cats and I drink tea, so get over it. So the Firefly, I mean, to me, it was so awesome. It really broke down John Cena. And for the people that have always said Super John Cena never loses, and Super John Cena has never have any sort of flaws, and John Cena buries the other talent. And for this, I think it was a real eye-opening experience for the viewer, because Bray Wyatt, who is supposed to be your psychological Nightmare on Elm Street type person, broke down John Cena. John Cena came out. Well, first he was confronted by Puppet Vince, who I love. I love Puppet Vince. There's a new shirt right now on WWE.com that I want, and it's the Puppet Vince saying, "This is such good shit," and I love it. Like, I want to get that. But Vince McMahon confronts him, and he does the ruthless aggression thing, right? Do you have what it takes in mind, body, and soul to, for ruthless aggression, right? And, John Cena accepted that. And then the next shot, you see him come out, and, Bray Wyatt was emulating Kurt Angle, and John Cena was coming out in those little basic trunks, which was just the hometown team of wherever WWE was, the colors of the hometown team, wherever WWE was at that night. And they did the whole thing. What do you have? What do you possess that, thinks you're better, right? And he's like, ruthless aggression. He tries to slap him, but, the slap kept missing. These are John Cena's nightmares, right? And even Bray Wyatt teased them with the Bella twins. You can look, but you can't touch, right?
That was harsh.
Yeah, teased them with it, right? And again, you have to think about it. This is psychological. This is Bray Wyatt being able to use his powers. And I know it's a suspension of disbelief, but again, this is professional wrestling. And so to break down John Cena, nobody's has ever been able to do it, whether it was Undertaker, whether it was CM Punk, whether it was the Nexus, whether it was, Randy Orton or whoever. Nobody could ever break down John Cena, right? Half the crowd in the arena, hell, sometimes all the crowd in the arena would boo the absolute hell out of John Cena, but he would still come up, he would still do the salute, he would still do the "you can't see me" and all of the trademarks of John Cena. The Rock would come in and make fun of him, and nothing could break him down.
Right.
So that was the first step. The second step was, well, the next evolution of the John Cena character, which was the Doctor of Thugonomics, right? And so, the Doctor of Thugonomics originally was a heel character, transitioned to a face because the crowd loved the fact that John Cena used the Thugonomics character in a rap to basically bully the other wrestler. So, he would trash talk and use all sorts of innuendo about sexuality and, things like that. And so Bray Wyatt was like, you pick on the weaknesses of other people for your benefit, to propel yourself to what John Cena wanted. John Cena wanted to be the man, right? Going back to the ruthless aggression thing, everybody has heard about that meeting that Vince McMahon held where he was like, who's the new leader of the WWE? Who's the guy, the ruthless aggression? John Cena was the guy. So John Cena was doing whatever it took to get there. So, and Bray Wyatt even gave him an opportunity. Once he told him about how, the Thugonomics character is basically a bully, John Cena thought about it for a minute and then went right back to the Thugonomics and the little childish insults about, these nuts in your face and stuff like that, and then it went to the next part, right? Because this is the further escalation of the breakdown of John Cena. And so what does everybody talk about? Heel John Cena, right? Everybody's wanted it. They always expected it, you know. Well, I'm sorry. Actually, there's a little segue, and I forgot about this one. The Saturday night's main event.
Yep.
So Bray Wyatt, basically is like, hey, I got Johnny Muscles here, and there's the old blue barred steel cage, and then there's the Saturday night's main event banner, and John Cena is playing Hulk Hogan. Why? Because in the '80s, that's what Vince wanted, right? That was his golden goose, Hulk Hogan. And you were a body guy, and you talked like this, brother, and you shouted at the camera, and you said, things, like this. And John Cena couldn't be buff enough, right? Like he was just lifting those weights until he could no longer throw his arms, right? Because he wanted to be what Vince's creation is, what his idea of a main event is, which is a muscular guy, which is a body guy, right? Then we get down into what was my favorite part, because if you're talking an alignment with Hulk Hogan, well, Hulk Hogan was the man, right? I mean, he held the WWF title for 4 or 5 years consecutively. Main evented every WrestleMania. He was the train and say your prayers and eat your vitamins guy. And so Hulk Hogan was the parallel to John Cena, right? But what happened in the 90s, the mid 90s, is that Hulk Hogan turned heel. He took the plunge. He became Hollywood Hulk Hogan. He became the NWO. So when Bray Wyatt is acting like Eric Bischoff and saying, here's the best guy ever, Hollywood John Cena, and John Cena comes out, that was his way again of being a parallel to Hulk Hogan.
Yes.
So even though he never made that jump, there was the fear for John Cena, because if John Cena makes that jump, what happens? The movies may not happen, right? Hulk was making movies before he became a heel. What else happens to John Cena if he turns heel? His shirts don't sell. His toys don't sell. He's no longer the face of the company, right?
At a smaller level, but a much more personal level to me, look what happened to Sergeant Slaughter.
Right.
Yeah. He wasn't in G.I. Joe anymore. He wasn't selling any merch anymore. It just.
Right. I mean, that's why, a lot of guys, talk about when they start hitting that level where the merchandise sales come to play, it's beneficial to be a face rather than a heel, because you get that merch. Faces just sell more. And so while there is advantage to being a heel in terms of putting together a match, and we could talk about that in another podcast, but the advantage at that level to be the face of the company is those merchandise sales. If Cena turns heel earlier, then that would have never happened.
Right.
So that's his other fear, is him becoming Hollywood Hulk Hogan, right, in the NWO. And then what happens after that? He tackles Bray Wyatt and he just starts wailing on him, right? John Cena has lost it, right? They did the part where Bray Wyatt from WrestleMania 30, they talk about that match, and that, John Cena's had a multitude of chances because he is Vince's body guy. He is Vince's ideal. Bray Wyatt is the chubby little pig with the little chocolate all over his mouth, right? That's all of the little characters in Bray Wyatt's Funhouse are they have a part to play in his psyche.
Right.
And so when John Cena is on there wailing on him, right? He already tried to hit Bray Wyatt with a chair, and he's wailing on on Bray Wyatt, and it turns into the little pig. It turns into the little pig with, innocent looking with the chocolate all over its face. And John Cena sits up, the NWO shirt's gone, and he realizes that he is committed to himself. Once he did the chair thing, once he did the NWO thing, once he's admitted all of his insecurities as far as being the face and almost being fired when he first came in because he was so bland and things like that, and becoming a bully that's somehow also a good guy, he realized he he was had, right? I mean, Bray Wyatt had him in the palm of his hand, basically. You see the Fiend pop up, the Fiend puts away John Cena, and actually John Cena disappears. And so again, that I talked about watching boneyard matches. The only match that I watched this week more than once. The other match that I watched more than once is the Firefly Funhouse match, just to pick it apart and just realize how psychological it is. And granted, it's not a match in the traditional sense, but here's how I look at it again. If you're out there and you're like, man, I love it when Joey Ryan does the penis flex, or I love it, I've seen videos in the Indies and Europe and stuff like that of a guy is throwing an invisible grenade and they all pump, or doing a social distancing match where they're wrestling and they're 6 feet in between them. I've seen a forced Darth Vader choke. I've seen a referee officiate a match with two invisible wrestlers, right? And of course the broken Matt Hardy and so on and so forth. If you like those things, if you're saying, hey, it's performance art, this was it, just on a much, much bigger platform. And that's why people are talking about it. They're not talking about any of the other matches really at WrestleMania. They're talking about Firefly Funhouse. They're talking about the Boneyard match. And WrestleMania, WWE was very smart in doing that versus letting Undertaker go out to the ring and try to handle a 20-minute match with AJ Styles, or John Cena and Bray Wyatt trying to recapture what they did in a previous WrestleMania. It's much better to go down this route, and you can do so much more with it. And it left us with so many memories, including Vince saying, this is good shit. And I could tell you right now as a promoter how many times I've said that back. This is good shit that's going on in the ring.
I've seen it. I've heard it. I've been there.
Yes. So, those were, Josh, your thoughts on these two cinematic matches. I know you're a video guy and have a lot of media passion. What were your thoughts about it?
I like this. I like that it was different. It did cut some of the monotony of where the hard cam was, just seeing the entrance, and which I'm glad they did that, by the way. But for me, watching the story and watching it as a movie, the thing that I didn't get until I've seen different Twitter posts and all that, and you and I have talked about it, I didn't understand Cena not finally hitting him with the chair.
Right.
I didn't get that.
The previous WrestleMania match,
right?
Because he gave Cena the chair, and again, that was his opportunity to give in, right, and be the heel, and he didn't. He had to be Super Cena, and so, again, I could totally understand opinions, and if it's traditional, man, I got to have my Luthez and my Bruno Sammartino-esque type matches and things like that. Then yeah, you probably hated it. You probably did. And the thing about art, and wrestling is an art, is that art is subjective, and for if you get 100 people in a room to look at one piece of art, you're going to get probably 250 different opinions on it. And so that's what's happening here. I just think, my opinion is that WWE did such a great job with this Audible, and did such a great job with the cinematic wrestling. And then, hey, it's continuing. If you saw NXT this week, and you saw Tommaso Ciampa, and you saw Johnny Gargano, right? And they had an hour and 15-minute long NXT match. And it was filmed in a different style. It wasn't, I'm sure you could talk about like the frame rate or something like that, right? It was filmed kind of like in that cinema-esque style. The lighting
24 frames per second. There was sweeping camera movements and
right.
The dolly shots.
It was filmed like a cinema style, even though it had more wrestling. And obviously with those two athletes, you can do a longer match than you can with Cena and Bray Wyatt and Undertaker and Styles, but they're still teetering that cinematic match line. It started off with a soundtrack. The Undertaker Bone Armor match had a soundtrack the entire time. It was awesome. It had the different ebbs and flows and ups and downs of a match, and the soundtrack matched it. And I thought it was interesting. It was different. It was brilliant. Could it have been done or would have been tried if, they didn't have to do this and didn't have a WrestleMania in front of 80,000 people? Who knows, right? I mean, the jury is a little out on that. Maybe they would have had a regular wrestling match, but they took a risk. And then so now you got NXT doing that last night. And then also talking about Broken Matt Hardy, I saw on AEW that they're going to do an elite deletion match with Matt Hardy and Chris Jericho at the Hardy compound. So, again, if you can't. I've been talking a lot about this, about fans just being fans, and you can't just sit there and pick. Okay, I'm going to be a fan of only this, and anything else is gonna this sucks, or I hope it goes out of business. When I was growing up, you loved all wrestling. In my opinion, I thought WWF was better than AWA, but I didn't watch AWA and be like, man, everything on this is shit, and I hope it runs out of business. I was hoping that even in the AWA's dying days, they could still turn the ship around. The Monday Night Wars were the same thing. I had the picture-in-picture, like so many people had, of WCW Nitro and WWE Raw, but I didn't sit there and say, God damn, I hate WCW and I hope they go out of business. I just was like, this is awesome wrestling. And for years after that war was over, people were like, man, I wish WWE had some competition. Impact tried, wasn't successful at that level, and now there's AEW. But, rather than sit there and say, God, WWE sucks and I hate everything that they do and I hope they go out of business. And I can tell you right now, if WWE went out of business, that would kill professional wrestling.
Yes.
AEW included. And some fans might disagree with me on that. But like I said, when you are the mainstream source, right? Just like I said, Coke, right? Sometimes when people say Coke, it doesn't necessarily mean Coca-Cola. It just means a soda. It's replaced soda as a word. WWE is the same thing for wrestling. And when you sit there and say, WWE is dying, people automatically, well, so is wrestling, right? And, the diehards, maybe not, but sponsors and venues and things like that do, networks and stuff like that. So, but anyway, like I said, AEW is doing a elite deletion match. And I mean, hey, look, if you're going to pick on WWE for their cinematic matches, and then, next week or whenever this elite deletion match occurs with Matt Hardy and Jericho on AEW, you can't say, well, oh man,
that's the greatest thing ever now.
Yeah. Because you're going to have to sit there and say, all right, these promotions now are saying we can do cinematic wrestling and deal with the lack of crowd. So
the very first match I saw from the Hardy compound, I saw it and I was like, this is garbage. This is horrible.
Yes.
I can't stand this. Then I watched it 3 more times.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, you've showed me clips, like all the clips I was talking about earlier with the, invisible grenade and the referee.
The force choke slam.
Yeah, referee roughing a match between 2 visible opponents. I thought, God dang, this thing sucks.
Wait a minute. Kenny Omega wrestled a 9-year-old little girl.
Yes, and I remember you showed that to me. I was like, Josh, this is garbage, right? Because I was made to brought out the thing, good old Southern wrestling and NWA. That's the way, I mean, even WWF, for some of those fans were, too much for those NWA Southern fans. They're like, oh, the snakes and the dragons and the bulldogs and blah, blah, blah. It's all a bunch of circus, right? And so I remember that. And so, yeah, I mean, it does. First time I saw it, I was like, this is ridiculous. Then I watched it again. And then I watched it again. I was like, all right, it's a performance piece. And it's actually pretty entertaining, right? And so it doesn't mean I want to sit there and see a whole card full of invisible wrestlers.
Right.
But, every once in a blue moon, they put together something creative like that. It's interesting. And
that would be good for payroll, though.
Yes, that is good shit.
But hey, we need to talk about this because Sean Cotner brought. I'm looking at my screen over here. If you keep on wondering why I'm turning to the side, he was asking about the Edge and Orton match, which just like the NXT match, I enjoyed, but I thought both of them ran a little too long, especially with the NXT match having commercials.
The thing about the thing about Mania, and I told you this after it was over, but the thing about Mania, to me, with the exception of pre-show matches and maybe and maybe a couple of other ones, every match told a story. And I mean, whether you disagree with that or not, Edge and Randy Orton told a story. And so even though, and by the way, you have to know the styles. And Edge and Randy Orton, they're not going to put together a 10-minute high spot fest match. Edge and Randy Orton have always been slow and methodical and at their own pace. And so that's what you got. You got them brawling all over the performance center. And if you notice, people joke about Charlotte's match and things like some of the other women's matches sounded a little like porn because the wrestlers were more audible, right? You can hear them, and obviously they were projecting more.
Right.
So and that's what also made the other cinematic matches interesting too for me. But yeah, I mean, for Edge and Randy Orton, it did feel a little long, but it told the story of their friendship, right? And why Randy Orton was trying to take out Edge because friend, he doesn't want him back in wrestling and hurting his neck again and going through the the uh, the ordeals of being a WWE superstar. And so at the very end, after Edge, knocked out Randy Orton, what happened? Edge is, there crying and hugging Randy Orton. So he feels bad that it's kind of like I don't want to sit there and say it's a parallel to John Cena in the Firefly Funhouse, but Edge had to go to this whole other place to defeat his friend, to sit there and prove that he's back in WWE and belongs in WWE and belongs with the travel and the schedule and all the ordeals of being a WWE superstar. So in that instance, that was the story, and I thought it was well done. So yes, Sean Cotner, I hope you caught that and you got what you wanted with the Edge and Randy Orton thing. And then some of the other Mania matches, I think you got a picture of the triple threat ladder match, and so I don't know if you could put that one on there, but
right now
they had a triple threat ladder match with Morrison, Kofi Kingston, and one of the Usos. I forget which Uso it was, but it was a great match for two things. Number one, obviously filled in for the gap of Miz not being there and so on and so forth, and another way of having the tag titles relevant. But more importantly, it really showcased how much harder, and I'm just going to speak as a performer, how much harder you have to hit when there's nobody there.
Yes.
Right. And you see it on the indies sometimes, depending on the guy and guys, that when guys feel they need to crank it up a notch, and there's nobody in attendance or they're very few in attendance or they're being quiet, that's when they start hitting the hell out of each other. And that triple threat ladder match, they were beating the hell out of each other. So it was a monumental effort. Another one, I think I just saw the picture a second ago, was Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins. And same thing there. Kevin Owens, having enough of the Monday Night Messiah and doing whatever it takes. And the Monday Night Messiah being that chicken shit heel of, kind of like Sergeant Slaughter. You were talking about Sergeant Slaughter. When Sergeant Slaughter was a heel, he'd be like, "This is Slaughter rules," right? And he'd be like, "I get myself disqualified or counted out, and it's nothing to me," And so that's what Seth Rollins seemed to be doing was, taking the cheap way out. Kevin Owens calls him back in. They do the big spot off the WrestleMania sign, and Kevin Owens wins. And again, that was another match where the guys just have to hit so much harder and also told a story. And then the other matches I thought, a lot of people say, who is my favorite guy right now, right? And I make no mistake about all time, Macho Man Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, in the 90s, of course, Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold Steve Austin, so on and so forth. So one question I always get is, who is your favorite wrestler right now? And my favorite wrestler right now, and I know it's going to piss some diehards off. But it's Charlotte Flair. I genuinely believe she never has a bad match. She is always delivering. No matter what she does, it's always seen in a very, very high light. And, obviously, if you're a daughter of Ric Flair, you have massive, massive shoes to fill. And so, you do have to step it up. I just think she's a tremendous athlete. And, she defeated Rhea Ripley. And I know, some people obviously, didn't enjoy that or whatever. But the thing about Charlotte is, and she put it on her Twitter too, she's been calling herself Miss WrestleMania. And that's what she is. She might be, her and Becky Lynch might be this generation's Rock and Austin. They might be this generation's Cena and Batista, or Hogan and Savage, where they are the faces of the company. And for her to win, yes, it would have been nice to see Rhea Ripley get a shot. But the thing about it is now that she's the NXT champion, it puts more eyes on an NXT, as well as has some matchups that are going to that are allowed that you want to see on the main roster.
Well, see, that's the thing I was going to do, and that's why I switched back to our faces here. To be honest with you, I had never heard of Rhea Ripley before. When I skimmed through NXT or anything like that, and oh my goodness, she just lost to
Mrs. WrestleMania.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even to people who don't know anything about wrestling, there's not as many people out there or there's a lot of people that claim they don't know. But this is Charlotte Flair. You know the name Flair, and if you know anything about wrestling, you know how good she is, and she's had NXT was this level, then you have SmackDown, then you have Raw, but she's had these titles, and now she's like you're saying, she didn't take a step down. It was kind of like when Asuka lost.
Right.
Now they didn't have to worry about nobody could ever beat her or anything like that. Now there's more of a story, more of a challenge, and this is bringing more light to I would have never heard of Rhea Ripley until she made it to one of the other rosters.
Right.
Maybe.
And like I said, I've never seen her have a bad match. There's a match that's talked about. Charlotte and Lacey Evans is another one that I like. They were doing a very physical match on, I believe it was on Raw. And, it was a very short kind of brawl-esque match. And people were like, oh, it was terrible, blah, blah. And I was like, well, that's because you have two statuesque blondes going at it. So that was the story of that match. So rather than letting him go out there and do a 20-minute match with, near falls and reversals and things like that, you have these two 6-foot blondes that, are very good in shape, and just let them go out there and beat each other up. That's the only match I've ever seen people pick on Charlotte Flair. So is it annoying that she's always the winner? Maybe for some fans it is, but the thing is that she, just like how Cena before her and Hogan and Stone Cold and so on and so forth, is putting the company on their back. And so when that happens, I could tell you just from my experience as a promoter, you want that talent to sit there and say, I'm going to put it on my back. And every time I go out there and perform, I'm going to nail it. I'm going to bring eyes to the product, and I'm going to, produce. And that's what you want out of a talent when you're a promoter. And so that's why I enjoy Charlotte Flair. I think she's tremendous and my favorite talent today. The other women's match that told another story is obviously Bayley and Sasha Banks, and we see where that's going. Obviously, that's going to tear a rift between Sasha Banks and Bayley. But all things considered about Bayley, she went from the hugger, the sweet, wholesome character, and she's been a pretty good heel.
Yeah.
She has completely flipped it and doing a pretty good job. And this puts Sasha Banks in a position where I kind of prefer Sasha Banks as a face. And it puts her in that position for a later shot. The other women's matches, or the other things that stood out women-wise, Liv Morgan, I think, is going to be a person to watch. Obviously, they put her in a pre-show position with the veteran Natalia. But I think there's a lot of upside to Liv Morgan. When you talk about, um, kind of the smaller girls that have done well, right? Your Alexa Blisses and your Paiges and your AJ Lees and so on and so forth. Liv Morgan's on her way there. And I predict that not now, but probably in about a year or two, somewhere around that time frame, it's going to be cranked up a notch. She's going to be in that WWE system and, understand what to do. And then, of course, I love, this, Josh. I love the Kabuki Warriors.
Yes.
And I thought it was a great way to start off WrestleMania. There's nothing I like better than them just yelling stuff in Japanese and be like, da, 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 right? It's just, I really enjoy the Kabuki Warriors. I was a little disappointed that they lost. I know people like Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, and that's well and good. But I am. This is the ReMARKable Wrestling Podcast. I'm a mark for the Kabuki Warriors. I think they're fantastic. So I thought the women also really delivered at WrestleMania too.
So I stay away from the dirt sheets because I don't want to know. For the stuff I don't know, I like surprises. But I happened to stumble across something on Instagram about Kari saying about her leaving, about they were offering her more money to go back to Japan and wrestle out there, and some promoter out there is insisting, and her contract's just about up and all that. So, I mean, I went into that match seeing that, going, yeah, they're going to lose.
Right.
They're going to lose. She's not coming back. And that was horrible. Y'all need to quit reading that stuff on the internet. Watch it and enjoy it.
I mean, that is one thing that I think the indies have over WWE and AEW and so on and so forth, is that, with the indies, when we present our product, there's not really a dirt sheets. There's not really a Brandon booked this guy. I mean, you see the card in advance, but maybe if I'm doing, some sort of comeback or some sort of surprise or something, you generally don't see that. And so that's one advantage that the indies have over, the big time players of that of the wrestling world. But I could tell you, I mean, this is growing up. I mean, we're talking to 40-year-old guys that, it was so much better at WrestleMania 8 to have the Ultimate Warrior come running down the aisle during the Hulk Hogan Sid Justice match than it was to read on the internet. And there wasn't internet at the time, but read on dirt sheet, read on the internet that the Ultimate Warrior was probably coming back. It made it so much more special, and thus you get a better reaction actually out of the crowd. As a performer, you get a better reaction, right? And so that surprise element and things like that. I mean, they're still able to do some stuff today. I mean, the Hardys coming back at WrestleMania was well done, but it was already kind of out there to you already that, Hardy's contract was expiring with Impact, and so they're, thinking about going WWE.
I won't say why we knew that was going to happen.
I know, man. Cross your fingers. I'll tell the story because this is a podcast, so we got to tell stories. So, talking about the Hardys.
Yes.
I want to tell you people that are out there watching or going to watch this later, how close the Hardy Boys were to being in RCW. It was close. All right. There were already talks. There were already, conversations. And I continuously was trying to get a hold of one of the Hardy Boys. And towards, this is shortly before WrestleMania. Towards WrestleMania, virtually impossible to get a hold of them. Sure enough, they come back at WrestleMania, and the Hardys were never in RCW. But we were this close to having the Hardy Boys in RCW. Believe me, I tried super hard to get the Hardy Boys in RCW at least one time. Could it ever happen? I hope so. But yeah, it was very interesting that, that was, I mean, literally like about a month before they appeared at WrestleMania. And so once they came out of WrestleMania, I was like, well, obviously they're not going to be bookable for RCW, but yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
So
I mean
inside news on the podcast.
that's right. We got to talk about inside stuff.
Never shared anywhere else.
That's right. And you know, I mean, hey man, all the good podcasts have the dirt, you know, something to wrestle with, you know, and stuff, you know.
I like what you did there.
Yeah. You know, things like that. And you know, so that's what all the podcasts have gotta do. They gotta have some dirt. They gotta have some of the inside scoop.
Yeah,
so.
But I hate that. That's when I knew I hated Eric Bischoff, when he said that Mick Foley won the title.
Yeah, different era though, man. It's a different era, and I know, you know, some veterans of the business say some things are always consistent. And when you're talking about the meat and potatoes of a wrestling match and things like that, yeah, there's some things that are consistent. But there's some things that just have to adjust. And if you cannot adjust to it, and you're like Blockbuster Video, you know, they were behind the curve on you know how they're getting their product to customers. And now everybody talks about the tales of Blockbuster Video. If you don't adjust in some capacity, if you're stuck in your ways, and granted, there are some things that never change. Totally agree with that. But there are some things that have to change because society changes as well. And so you have to be willing to stray from the you know, formula just a tiny bit. Keep the meat and potatoes. Keep that, you know, that DNA basically. But you're going to have to work around what society has changed to.
I like that inside story about the Hardys.
Yes, there's a lot more. I mean, there's a lot more stories from being in wrestling in 20 years. So, but yeah, we'll get all those. And, you know, I think we touched on everything with Mania and all that stuff. So we talked, you know, I said I was going to talk about WWE and AEW and, you know, all the other wrestling, and not so much RCW. But Josh, this is the time.
The time for what?
The time when I shill my products. So
what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about.
I sent you the pictures. You know about this.
There you go. Pro Wrestling Tees.
Yes.
.com/RCW forever.
You know, just like the NWO, buy our shirt, right? And here's the thing too, you know, right now, independents are hurting big time because both wrestlers and the promotion themselves with not being able to run. So the best way to support your favorite indie wrestlers is to buy their stuff. There's a lot of great talent out there. They're obviously shilling their stuff and Pro Wrestling Tees and things of that nature. And the cool thing about Pro Wrestling Tees is that they have all sizes available, even up for the, you know, the big boys up there, the extra larges.
Okay, what are you saying?
So they got all the sizes.
I resemble that size.
I can't tell you how many live events, you know, where there is a guy that walks away and says, man, I wanted to get a shirt, but they don't have a double XL or something like that. And, you know, but at ProWrestlingTees.com, in our store, we have all sizes available, all the way up to, I think it's like triple XL or, you know, somewhere around that range. And then they have a lot of great selection of various indie wrestlers. And that's the way to support during this, you know, pandemic, is to buy their merch. The other thing you can do, and what pictures you change it to? You change it to the picture?
It's there. The belt.
Which one is it? Belts. All right. So, hey, check this out. One of the things that I see wrestling fans always wearing, and hell, even some, you know, celebrities and famous athletes, is championship belts. So while you sit there and say, I'm gonna buy a replica belt that so many other fans have, right? Why not sit there and say, I want to buy a belt that's so unique, you know, not that many other people have it. So fortunately, due to this other guy named Brandon, another genius named Brandon, we are able to produce replica belts for the RCW company here. So we have the RCW Championship, we got the International Championship, Tag Team titles, Legends Championship, Phoenix, and the Women's Championship. And so all of those can be replicated. And, you know, for right now, again, this goes to support these companies and these people like me that are not able to run during this pandemic. So it would be great to, go around San Antonio and have the RCW championship around your waist. And I think we got another picture.
Yes, with that being said, and since everybody's streaming now, and we're all at home looking for stuff to do, and not only can everybody have a podcast, they also have something that they don't want to watch the podcast or look at our ugly mugs. They can go over to, there you go.
Yes. So now, we're putting up first of all the Young Gun shows are now available on the things that we stream on, and then we're uploading classic content. There's been so many talents that have come through RCW, not just in terms of me bringing in names, but guys from here that went on. Guys like Ray Rowe and Sammy Guevara and Keith Lee, and so many more that made good names for themselves, got their starts, here in the Texas Indies, and one of them being RCW as one of their stops. And so we're uploading some classic content. Of course, we're on Impact Plus, which is also on the Fight app. If you have Fight, you can also get Impact Plus.
FITE.
Yep. And then we also have our streaming service, which you can check out at rivercitywrestling.net. Follow the links from there. Or if you're a subscriber to High Spots Wrestling Network or Title Match Wrestling Network, our content is also on there as well. So you can go back and, we're talking like when RCW had a TV show that emanated from Sideliners and all of those events, they're on there right now. You can check them out 24/7, and they're available for rental or for download, actually. And you can go there and you can check them out and watch some wrestling while you cannot go outside.
Look, this is how close we got to the Hardys coming here. They sent me a drone.
We got a Vanguard 1.
Vanguard 0.5.
Yes. So, but yeah, those are the ways to support it, and just support any other wrestling companies. And this is kind of how the ReMARKable Wrestling Podcast is going to go. It went a little bit longer than I wanted, but
I do have to discuss something real quick though, Brandon. And this was something that you did. Let me bring this up real quick. And we hadn't talked about this, so don't worry about it. It's nothing that bad. What's up with that picture, Brandon?
I tell you what, Boom Boom is a man of many talents. And so one of my talents is photoshopping. And, I'm not going to lie, I got a little inspiration from, JR's podcast and some of the other Conrad and Thompson podcasts, and how they kind of promote and do some, some photoshopping a little bit.
But see, I was like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I was like, why not run with, since we're talking about the recent WrestleMania, why not run with that? And then why not have Josh with blonde, spiky hair, a little crew cut, those spiky hair.
Yes.
And then I already have, it's in a man bun right now, but I already have long flowing locks. And I get confused for Drew McIntyre already. I'll walk down the street, obviously not right now because there's coronavirus, but I'll walk down the street and people will be like, Drew McIntyre. I'm like, close. It's Boom Boom Brandon Oliver. So, I was like, let me choose one that, kind of looks a little twin to me. And it was a pretty good experience.
Yeah, that's like me walking down the street getting called the medium show.
Or the next medium thing.
Wow.
Since you got the Brock Lesnar.
But we're not like any other podcast. You're not going to find this anywhere else. Where one guy is a bevy of information that's been in the wrestling business for years, and the other guy's a fat tech guy with like smart aleck thing. Oh shit.
And this is why we say ReMARKable Wrestling Podcast, right? AKA anyone can have a wrestling podcast. And believe me, there's a lot of people out there, and I'm not going to pick on anybody, I don't want to say anything wrong, but there's a lot of wrestling podcasts out there. So I was like, let's go ahead and jump into the, the white noise basically. And have some fun while we're quarantined.
Yeah, until we're allowed to go back outside, then we'll completely forget that this is happening and we won't do it anymore.
That's right. That's right.
So I think we should wrap this up, Brandon. It's gonna be 8:30.
I know, that which is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be.
Well, I mean,
I was like,
we had the
gosh, I'm only
technical.
doing 30. I'm only doing 30 minutes. That's all I'm doing. I didn't want to do a podcast to begin with.
All the notes and all that, and you should see what he sent me. He had like, we're gonna do 3 minutes on this, 2 minutes on that. Out the window. I don't know what structure is. Look at my life.
Oh, yeah.
But anyways, so next week or when are we coming back?
Let's do it again next Thursday, 7 o'clock. Does that sound good to everybody else?
Yeah, there's a delay. I'm sure they're all saying sure.
All right. Well, I believe that they are.
So remember, they can go to what ReMARKable WP on Twitter and Facebook.
And Facebook. Yep. Follow us, ReMARKable WP. We're going to be sharing lots of news and wrestling news and funny little pictures and stuff like that and all that good stuff. So, keep track of us here, ReMARKable WP on Facebook and Twitter.
All right. I got to go to the bathroom.
All right.
What's our sign off?
Hey, until next week, this is Boom Boom Rain Over and No Gimmicks Needed. Josh Long saying, see you next week.
Bye. Thanks, y'all.